Welcome back to Secret Weapons, and today we're taking a look at the Synesthesia by GFI System. Before we dive into this, let's just talk about GFI as a company for a second, because they don't do anything halfway, it seems. I reviewed the Specular Tempus on this channel earlier this year, and if you saw that video, you know how much I like the stuff that they do. That thing was a titanic device. It was small, it only had a 100 milliamp draw, and it held its own perfectly with things like the timeline, the big sky, the Empress big boxes, the Eventide big boxes. Like, that thing is a game changer. The Cab Zeus was the same way. The Cab Zeus is similarly a really revolutionary, totally changed the way that I recorded direct in guitars device. And this thing is no different. This dual engine modulator is insane. You have two complete pedals inside of this with like a myriad of routing options with left, right, cascading, parallel, and you can blend how much of each of them you want. It's crazy. I first played this thing at Winter NAMM this year, nearly a year ago at this point actually, in its prototype form, and I was completely enamored with it. It's the dual engine modulation stuff was absolutely amazing. Being able to kind of tie two different tremolos together and have them play off of each other was really interesting. The panning effects of the tremolos and the movement of like the flanging and the chorus sounds were all really, really beautiful. And I spent most of this year anticipating the final version of this pedal coming out. And it's very fitting that we're recording this in December of this year, because I feel pretty comfortable saying this might be my favorite release of the year. This thing is intense. It has a ton of great sounds in it. The slow volume, which is totally not a slow gear, setting is phenomenal. It tracks well, it triggers the way you want it to. Being able to push that into a chorus or a tremolo is fascinating. The dimension chorus sound in this thing is ridiculous. I love it. I love it as a mono chorus. It sounds great in stereo as well, but it's also one of like 4 choruses in this thing. It's nuts. One of my favorite things about this thing is the fact that I am finding myself opening up new sounds that I don't really utilize before this. This thing does trem sounds that I do not have in any other device that I have, and I find that I gel well with tremolo in this thing much more quickly. Once again, when you watch the video at the end, you will see that the video I did of this thing in January at NAMM is a lot of tremolo. But the crazy thing is I'm finding myself doing things like a ton of slow gear into another effect, which I think is amazing. I've had conversations with people before about how the slow gear only sounds good if you're pushing it into a preamp and a delay and a reverb and all that stuff. And the fact that you've got the slow gear, oh, and by the way, the slow gear in this thing, I should stop saying slow gear. And by the way, the slow volume in this thing has built-in delay and reverb anyways, and it sounds great. This thing can basically take the place of most of your pedal board. But then I'm also diving into stuff that I don't normally play, sample and hold, phasing and filtering and stuff that sounds incredible, and the stereo images are so wide, and I find that they're as gentle or as intense as you want them to be, and it really, really lets you kind of open up your playing to new textures and new dynamics, and you find yourself kind of playing different styles and different rhythms because you're accessing these sounds that you don't normally play into. Like, I didn't know that I liked Univibe, but apparently I do. The inclusion of a mono effects loop on this thing is also phenomenal. GFI's pitch shifting is always and has always been kind of bright and brittly in a way that I don't always connect with. I find that on low notes, the octave up stuff and the fifth above stuff sounds really nice, if a little intense, but like when you start going higher on your guitar, you start getting a lot more kind of shrillness. And the effects loop on this just lets me put my Chase Bliss Condor in it and put a low pass on there and really just fix it. And there's a ton of really interesting things you can do in that same vein with your effects loop in here. Do you want drive after your chorus but not on your clean tone? You can do that with this. Do you want reverb just cascading over your phaser, or your phaser cascading over your reverb, once again without your dry tone being affected? And once again, you can do that. It's almost like whatever feature set that you wanted in this thing isn't here, or whatever extra parameter you want to adjust about an included algorithm on here, you have the option to get into those things because of these two ports right here. For all of that intensity, for all of this routing, and for all of the algorithms inside this thing, you're definitely going to want to utilize their desktop editor for this thing. Every single knob on this thing is also a button. Listen to this. Everything presses. And it's because this thing has a ton of customizability, a ton of routing options, a ton of little changes that you can make in alternate parameter stuff, and you will benefit yourself greatly if you just use the desktop editor to get acquainted with this. So that's like my number one piece of advice is MIDI, auxiliary, and use the desktop editor. But once you kind of get a handle on it, things are super easy. And the great thing is, even if you're just right here, everything's still super simple. You have your speed and your depth for almost every single algorithm in this thing, and you have your tweak, and that's kind of all you need to get good sounds out of this thing. You can really go deep with it, but you don't have to, which is really fantastic. So yeah, I could keep ranting and raving about this thing, and I'm sure I will, and I'm sure you'll see it a ton on Instagram over the next couple months and everything. But for now, I just want to say this before we dive into some sounds. This thing is phenomenal. I'm really impressed with how this thing has developed since the prototype in January. I really dug it then, and I really dig it now. I'm incredibly happy with the sounds in this thing, and I think it'll be a staple on my board for a long time to come. So, GFI, you guys are awesome. Thank you for this. So let's jump into some sounds and see what we get. Okay, first things first, let's talk through our signal chain. We are running the Emerson Duke Silver compressor into a Benson preamp, the Strymon Iridium with the cabinets bypassed into the Chase Bliss Audio Dark World, the GFI Synesthesia, the Empress Ecosystem, GFI Specular Tempus, Immerse Reverberator by New Neighbor, and the GFI Cab Zeus straight into our Apollo Twin by Universal Audio Interface. So let's take a listen with the Synesthesia bypassed. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to run through some highlights that I like from individual modes, and then we'll go through and we'll add some stuff together and really kind of dig into how these different sounds play against each other. Let's start with a Dimension C chorus. So the tape flanger is one of my favorite sounds in this thing. I'm not a huge flanger person, but like this one is just phenomenal. So let's play through a couple of notes and let's hear how that kind of stretchy tape quality really comes to life when you start playing chords with it. The sample and hold stuff on this thing is absolutely incredible. It's really quirky, it's a little quacky, but in a very cool way. So I think it can be used really subtly in a really nice way when you really kind of drench it in reverb. So let's put reverb into the front of it with the Chase Bliss Dark World. Like I said, I didn't know that I liked Univibe before I started playing with this thing, but now that I'm here, I'm a fan. Another flavor of sample and hold that you can find on this thing is the sample and hold filter. And once again, when you put reverb into the front of it just to really accentuate the trails and the decay on that, there's just something really beautiful about it. There's a lot of settings on this thing that have kind of dynamically controlled parameters. Some of the tremolo sounds can be modulated by your pick dynamics, and this filter mode is the exact same way, which if you start nice and soft and really lean into it, you can create some really cool speed up, slow down moments. It's a little laser beamy, but it's fun. Okay, the slow volume is one of my favorite sounds on this thing. So let's turn off everything else except that slow volume, and then we'll play with how everything inside of this one algorithm can really build out a sound. So guitar by itself. And slow volume. And slow volume with echo included in. And then let's add in all of our other effects. Okay, let's start diving into tremolos, one of my favorite parts of this pedal. Let's start with a basic tremolo and just look at how the mono version from the stereo version gets really interesting. So, tremolo by itself. Oh, and by the way, that change in speed is a glitch function that you can dial in or out. So, no glitch, nice and consistent. And then plenty of glitch brought back in. Now let's take that and knock it into stereo. Dynamic tremolo is one of my favorite parts of this pedal. You can set the speed or the depth to increase or decrease depending on your playing dynamics for some very, very cool effects. So this is with it set up to slow down the speed as you increase your pick attack. And let's increase depth with pick attack. And a speed increase from very slow up to like blazing fast. And here's where things get interesting. You can take a tremolo like that and feed it with another tremolo going into it, both in stereo and both dynamically modulating different parameters. Here we have two dynamic tremolos, the first one decreasing depth and the second one increasing speed. And here's that same thing with the second one being chopper, which is an incredibly aggressive full zero tremolo. So let's put a slow volume through that same really choppy tremolo. This is a slow volume with a ton of delay meant to feed into a dynamic tremolo that increases depth with pick attack. This is a slow volume set to come in very slowly as it modulates the speed of a dynamic tremolo. Okay, let's try something a little more normal. This is a dimension C into a harmonic tremolo. And like I mentioned earlier, sometimes that octave up stuff in the GFI stuff can get a little bit shrill. So let's hear the octave up by itself. And then let's engage the condor and the slow volume to kind of see how you can create really big, gentle soundscapes with that sound.